Welcome to our YouTube channel, Knowledge Makers. The gates are closed. The fields outside the walls are burning. No merchants are coming. No grain is arriving. And no army is coming to save you. Inside the city, coins still jingle in pockets, contracts still exist, and laws technically still apply. But none of that matters anymore, because in a siege, you don't run out of money first. You run out of trust. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. When we picture ancient wars, we imagine armies clashing, swords raised, walls breached in dramatic assaults. That image is comforting. It suggests that wars are decided by strength, bravery, or tactics in the open. But most ancient wars weren't won that way. They were won slowly, quietly, and economically, through sieges. A siege wasn't about defeating an army. It was about shutting down a system, cutting supply lines, freezing trade, turning time itself into a weapon. The goal wasn't to destroy the city from the outside, it was to let the city consume itself from within. Ancient cities were not just population centers. They were economic engines. They concentrated labor, wealth, food storage, political authority, and legitimacy. To control the city was to control the region around it. Direct assault was risky and expensive. Starvation was cheaper. A besieging army didn't need to win a battle. It just needed to wait. And waiting worked because cities depended on continuous inflows of food, fuel, and trust. Once those inflows stopped, the economy inside the walls began to behave in ways that felt alien, irrational, even cruel, but were entirely predictable. The first thing to change wasn't money. Coins didn't vanish overnight. Prices didn't immediately collapse into chaos. What changed was what people actually wanted. In normal times, money is a promise. It represents future access to goods. In a siege, the future shrinks. Promises lose credibility, and food stops being a commodity and becomes the currency. Grain replaces silver, bread replaces wages, rations replace salaries. Control of food becomes control of the city. This is where the siege economy truly begins. Authorities take over distribution because they have to. If markets are allowed to operate freely under extreme scarcity, prices explode. The poor starve immediately. Unrest follows. So the state steps in, rationing systems appear, fixed prices are announced, bread is subsidized or seized outright. On paper, this looks like order. In practice, it creates something far more dangerous, a gap between official rules and lived reality. Price controls don't eliminate scarcity, they reorganize it. Merchants don't stop responding to incentives just because the law says they should. If selling grain legally at a fixed price means certain ruin, they don't sell it, they hide it, they dilute it, they wait. Smuggling becomes more profitable than obedience. Hoarding becomes rational. Black markets emerge not because people are immoral, but because survival rewards those who ignore the rules. The siege economy doesn't destroy markets, it drives them underground. Meanwhile, trust erodes. Citizens stop believing that money will protect them. They stop believing that laws will save them. They stop believing that tomorrow will look anything like yesterday. And once trust collapses, every transaction becomes political. Every loaf of bread is a decision about who deserves to live another day. Every ration is a signal of power. Food distribution stops being logistics and becomes legitimacy. Who eats is who matters. This is where inequality stops being abstract and becomes lethal. In normal times, inequality can be disguised by abundance. In a siege, there's nowhere to hide it. Elites enter the siege with advantages that compound immediately. Stored grain, private networks, political leverage. They can negotiate, they can wait. The poor can't. Most urban populations relied on daily markets for survival. When those markets fail, there's no buffer. Soldiers are paid in food. Officials eat first. The rest are told to be patient. A siege doesn't create inequality. It removes the illusion that it wasn't already there. As days turn into weeks, money continues to circulate, but it buys less and less. Coinage doesn't disappear. It becomes irrelevant. Barter takes over. A sack of grain is worth more than a chest of silver. Jewelry trades hands for bread. Furniture becomes fuel. The economy doesn't collapse randomly, it simplifies. Value snaps back to utility. What keeps you alive today is worth everything. What might pay off someday is worth nothing. This is the moment when many cities cross the point of no return, often without realizing it. Laws still exist, but enforcement weakens. Contracts still exist, but outcomes don't. The state still claims authority, but its capacity shrinks with every missed meal. The siege economy reveals something deeply uncomfortable. Systems don't fail all at once. They fail in layers. First trust, then markets, then legitimacy, and only at the very end, order. From the outside, a siege looks static. The walls don't move. The armies wait. Inside, everything is changing. Incentives sharpen. Loyalties shift. Survival becomes the organizing principle. The besieging army doesn't need to breach the gates because the economy inside the city is already doing the work for them. By the time a city realizes that money can't save it, the siege has already done its job. The illusion finally breaks when the city understands that endurance is no longer a question of courage, but of arithmetic. How much food remains? How many mouths must be fed? How long before hunger rewrites loyalty? This is the moment when sieges stop being military standoffs and become economic verdicts. History records this transition with brutal consistency because once a siege economy reaches maturity, its outcome is rarely in doubt. Athens learned this during the Peloponnesian War. Behind its long walls, the city believed sea access and silver reserves would protect it, and for a time, they did. Money flowed. Wages were paid. The system looked intact, but plague, crowding, and supply strain exposed the weakness beneath the surface. Grain shortages spread panic. Trust collapsed faster than walls ever could. The city didn't fall because its treasury emptied. It fell because its economic assumptions did. The siege turned prosperity into vulnerability, and the most sophisticated democracy of the ancient world learned that logistics outlast ideals. Rome repeated the lesson over and over. During sieges of the late Republic and Empire, food became the decisive weapon. Coinage was abundant. Authority remained intact on paper. But once supply routes were cut, urban populations became liabilities instead of assets. Grain doles, once tools of stability, turned into ticking clocks. When bread stopped arriving, loyalty evaporated. Riots followed. Emperors rose and fell not on the battlefield, but in the streets. Rome didn't just conquer with force, it governed with food, and when food failed, power followed. No city illustrates the siege economy more clearly than Constantinople. For centuries, its walls repelled attackers, not because they were invincible, but because the city mastered endurance. Its real lifeline wasn't stone, it was the sea. Grain, trade, and supplies flowed through the Bosporus, buying time even when enemies gathered outside the gates. But in 1453, that lifeline was cut. Ottoman forces under Mehmed II sealed maritime access, strangling the city's economy before the siege even began. Inside the walls, rations tightened, prices soared, barter replaced money, starvation became leverage. Constantinople resisted for nearly 2 months, longer than most cities could under those conditions. But endurance has limits. When the city finally fell, it wasn't because its treasury was empty. It was because time and supply had run out. This pattern repeats because starvation is not a side effect of siege warfare. It is the strategy. Hunger breaks coordination. It shortens time horizons. It forces impossible choices. When people are starving, they don't think in terms of ideology or long-term loyalty. They think in terms of meals. Siege economies weaponize this reality. They turn survival into a negotiation. Surrender becomes a rational economic decision, not a moral failure. Power doesn't need to destroy a city if it can simply wait for its economy to dismantle itself. What makes siege economies so revealing is how quickly money loses its symbolic authority. Currency is a social agreement, a shared belief that tomorrow will exist in a form similar to today. Sieges destroy that belief. When tomorrow is uncertain, deferred value collapses. Inflation accelerates not because prices rise, but because confidence dies. Value compresses into the present. Food, fuel, shelter, protection, everything else becomes noise. This is why sieges feel uncomfortably modern. Strip away the walls and the armies, and the mechanics remain. Cut supply chains, restrict movement, introduce scarcity. Watch how fast normal economics dissolves. Wartime blockades, economic sanctions, sudden trade disruptions, and even natural disasters all trigger the same sequence, not because history is repeating, but because incentives don't change. Sanctions don't attack money directly. They attack access. They limit what can be imported, insured, shipped, or paid for. The currency may still exist. Banks may still function. Prices may still be posted. But the underlying flow that gives those symbols meaning begins to fracture. Goods arrive late or not at all. Substitutes appear. Quality drops. Costs rise. Inflation spikes, not because people suddenly become greedy, but because scarcity forces value into fewer hands. The same thing happens when supply chains snap, factories close, ports stall, transport slows. The system doesn't collapse evenly, it fractures along existing fault lines. Those with inventory, storage, or political leverage wait. Those without pay immediately. Hoarding reappears, not as a moral failure, but as a rational response to uncertainty. Black markets flourish because price controls and restrictions don't eliminate demand. They just push it out of sight. Cities hit by natural disasters reveal this pattern with brutal clarity. Roads close, power fails, fuel runs short. Official prices still exist, but availability doesn't match them. Barter replaces currency. Trust becomes local. Information matters more than money. People don't ask what something should cost. They ask whether it exists at all. The economy doesn't vanish. It compresses. This is where inflation, panic buying, and trust breakdown intersect. Inflation isn't just rising prices. It's the signal that confidence in future access is weakening. Panic buying isn't irrational. It's a vote against the system's ability to deliver tomorrow. And black markets aren't signs of chaos. They're proof that markets adapt faster than rules. Remove imports, restrict movement, interrupt logistics, and you don't need violence to destabilize an economy. You only need time, because once trust in access erodes, money stops coordinating behavior. And when money stops coordinating behavior, power reasserts itself through control of supply. There's a reason panic buying looks the same across centuries. When trust falters, people don't hoard currency. They hoard certainty. Grain or fuel, bread or generators, the items change, but the psychology doesn't. Nothing reveals belief in a system like watching how people behave the moment they're no longer sure it will be there tomorrow. And this is the final uncomfortable lesson of siege economies. They show us what systems are actually built to protect. In every siege, the pattern is clear. Authority prioritizes stability over fairness. Distribution favors control over equality. Loss is managed, not eliminated. Someone always absorbs the damage. Siege economies don't invent cruelty. They expose allocation. This isn't ancient history warning us about collapse. It's ancient history explaining design. Economies are fragile because they rely on assumptions. Continuous trade, enforceable trust, predictable tomorrow. When those assumptions break, what remains isn't chaos, it's hierarchy. Power concentrates. Value simplifies. Rules bend. And the system reveals its true priorities. Sieges teach us that money is never the foundation of survival. It's the interface. Food, energy, and trust are the reserves underneath. When those disappear, no amount of silver, gold, or paper can hold an economy together. Cities didn't fall because people lost faith. They fell because the math stopped working. History doesn't repeat, but pressure does. And pressure always exposes structure. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.